Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today we thought we would approach a subject that all of us have experience with in one form or another and to one degree and more, and that is fear. As many of us decide that we want to approach perhaps achieving our dreams and goals and find a particular obstacle that steps into the way and we're afraid of moving forward, we try to decide what it is we need to do. Should we face the fear, breathe into it, and do it in spite of it anyway? Or should we just simply find something else to do and leave it up to fate to be sure that we are able to achieve our dreams? Perhaps many of you approaching midlife find yourself in that fear of retirement. Do I have enough money in the bank account? Will I be able to live with my money, or will I see myself going beyond the years and running out of retirement funds? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, our guest is an authority on fear and fear-based disorders such as trauma, anxiety, and depression. She maintains her clinical psychology practice in Sonoma County, California, with her doctorate in clinical psychology and her master's degree in counseling. She is committed to working with individuals and groups to improve personal growth, relationship connection, and increased life fulfillment. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest and author of the book Joy from Fear, Create the Life of Your Dreams by Making Fear Your Friend. Dr. Carly Marie Munn is joining us here on the program today. Carla, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
How exciting it is to wake up and decide that your lifetime is filled for chasing fear down and learning to be its friend. How did all this start for you?
Good question. Try and make my story short. I decided probably somewhere in third grade that I wanted to be a psychologist, and life had other plans for me, and I've loved to write and think about things since I was tiny. And so I went through a variety of steps in life after college. I taught, I went to law school, I returned to school to get my master's in counseling, and then ended up in the business arena, which was lucrative in many ways, but not fulfilling. And it wasn't until I turned, right on the cusp of 40, and I thought, goodness, I'm not being a good role model for my children. I always tell them to follow their passion, follow their dreams, and here I'm living a very unfulfilled life. And so I chose to go back to school to earn my doctorate and to make my lifelong dream of becoming a psychologist come to life. Of course, there was a lot of fear involved in that. And so as part of my doctoral program, of course, you go through your dissertation and all of that, I realized that what I wanted to investigate was fear. I wanted to understand if I was somewhat unique in having let fear, hold me back for nearly 4 decades of my life, or if that was something that was a human issue. And so I did a qualitative and quantitative analysis of fear as part of my dissertation to understand if this was something that moved through most, if not all, human beings. And what I uncovered was that indeed fear, it makes sense, fear affects us all, and it is the degree to which we don't face our fear, the degree to which we don't make it our friend, that it holds us back. And so I also differentiate between what I call rational fear, which is fear of being bitten by, a neighbor's rather brutal dog, if one's neighbor's dog is like that, or the fear that is irrational, one that's come to us at some point in life, often from childhood, that tells us we should do this or we should do that, or we mustn't do this or mustn't do that. And then we build our life around those fears, often not realizing, as it was in my case, that I was afraid of setting out on my own. I was afraid of disappointing my family. I was afraid of not being a good wife, all of those things. And they were secretly running my life behind the scenes. And so when I realized that and decided to face fear, I thought, okay, now how can I help others with this? How can I help others uncover their own fears so that they don't spend decades stuck in a life that is unfulfilling? And that is how my book, Joy from Fear, came to life. I wanted to put my insights into easy-to-follow, quick tips and tools. And when I say quick, they are quick in concept, but they do take a lot of practice because you're reprogramming your brain, you're reprogramming your life, And fear doesn't, destructive fear doesn't want to leave us easily. It's used to having a hold. So that's the story.
Mm-hmm. Quite a story. And, it's interesting that people to note that in your book you talk about how the National Institute for Mental Health, that nearly 20% of people in the United States, I'm assuming it's the United States, I don't know if it said that specifically, but they actually have a form of anxiety. And what's more alarming is more than half of them will actually have this anxiety starting as early as the age 11. What's going on here?
I think what's happening there, and new data is coming out every day that's letting us know that our youth and young teens are more and more susceptible to anxiety and struggling with it more. And I think not to blame technology, right? Because technology is not the demon. It's our misuse and overuse of technology. So I think it's partly technology, partly somewhat of a breakdown in the family system where children are, I work a lot with families and women and children, and so I see that what happens often, because things aren't very affordable these days, right? So we have both parents working and struggling, and sometimes a single parent working and struggling to make ends meet or to do what they believe they need to do for the child, to have the private school or the soccer or this or that. And so the child is often not getting the one-on-one attention that he or she needs in order to feel safe and secure. So I think that's one part of it. And then I think the other part of it is going back to technology. I think that, in the not too distant past, when TV was sort of a minimal effect in the family and the cell phone didn't exist, which wasn't that all long ago, right?
Right.
That children might have been exposed to news, negative news on the radio as they were driven to school, or maybe the nightly news program. But I was raised, not watching much TV, and if I was lucky, I saw the Disney show on Sunday nights, right? Yet, and, many parents don't put their children to bed with nighttime stories anymore, or a calm environment. So what we've done inadvertently is we go to sleep with and I talk about this in my book, that we used to go to sleep with lullabies and bedtime stories. We often go to sleep now with really negative political messages in our minds, or stories about global warming. And children don't understand these things. They just, especially if they're very young, they just know the impact of mommy's scared, daddy's scared, I'm scared, right?
Mm-hmm.
The children are going to sleep in an agitated state, and then once they have cell phones, and you probably saw the stats in my book, an inordinate amount of children are sleeping with cell phones in their room, waking up, in the middle of the night, getting texts, sending texts, so they're not getting good sleep. But more important is that they're going to sleep with social media in their heads, social media that thrives on comparison, of being compared to one's schoolmate, one's neighbor, this supermodel, that superhero, right? So the child is never feeling safe, never feeling good enough, and I think that is where a lot of the anxiety comes from. Then the child gets sleep, not nearly enough as is needed, and the statistics are in the book on that, and so then they wake up after a poor night's sleep, go off to school where they're compared to this person and that person, and, academic standards, and then they come home and they do it all over again. So to me, it's no wonder they're suffering from anxiety.
And it's true, because when you talk about it's not technology, and I agree with you on that, and maybe there'll be some people out here who argue, but it's what technology actually brings in front of somebody. Now, you were talking, for instance, about how, for instance, watching the news. This day and age, the news is just loaded with fear-based messages that would make you think that stepping outside your door, any array of a number of things can happen. And I remember, as I would sometimes see, and I don't really watch the news because being in media, you see through the fact that the news really doesn't tell you anything. When you really look at it, it's full of the most ambiguity, Well, no, on the news they said this. No, let's go back and see what they actually said, and you'll see, no, they didn't say that. You took a bunch of fractured material and information and you designed it to be what you thought it was, and that became the truth. But the fact is, they didn't say anything. And I also have spent some time when it came to, let's say, studying subliminal persuasion and propaganda, and it's pretty amazing to realize how long this stuff has been around. People would argue, for instance, well, that doesn't work. Well, then how do you explain all the drive-through fast food places when you're driving down the street? Think of that anxiety alone that's created in driving. There's a lot going on there, so you really don't stop into a place for a burger and some French fries because you're really hungry, maybe. But most of the time you do it because it makes you feel relieved. That's why they give you the snacks on airplanes. It isn't because people are hungry. It helps them to relax. So you think of how fear and anxiety come to us in its many guises, and I think in its awareness alone, if you could just become aware of that alone, you'll find yourself a lot calmer, just right off the bat.
I absolutely agree with everything you've said. I'm not a news watcher either when I can help it, and it's interesting. So I'll speak to that point first. My husband is an avid news watcher, right? And to me, the bedroom is for a technology-free space, right? So we have an agreement that if he wants to watch, news, we cut it off at this certain time, and that when I walk into the bedroom space as I'm doing my wind down for the night, that it is off. And I absolutely notice a difference in my quality of sleep and his quality of sleep when we have our area free of very reactive, sensationalized news after a certain time, because it gives the mind, and I would do without television 100% if it were my world, but it's not. And there are some positive parts, I do have to say. So I agree with you that there's often a lot that's said, but the substance is missing, and the message is missing, and the truth is missing because it's manufactured. And people don't slow down to realize that. And even if they did, it's hard to detangle it. So I agree with you on that, absolutely. And the piece that what you last said, the piece about slowing down, I think it's so important to learn to slow down. It's one of the key pieces in learning to work with fear and learning to work with anxiety and stress. And I love using this example because it's so common and something I catch myself doing. I'm having a busy day, and okay, now it's Saturday and I get to race off to yoga, right? So I'm going to race across town in order to relax. And so I have to catch myself, even cooking, doing whatever I'm doing, to say, wait a second, me racing doesn't serve me. I don't get there any faster when my heart's pumping and I'm anxious about being on time. I'll get there when I get there. And so if we can keep pulling ourselves back, noticing when anxiety arises, noticing when we're stressed, and like you said, become aware of it. Just become aware of it, don't judge it, and then we can choose right then and there to breathe, to relax, to take our foot off the gas pedal, and be more mindful. And that's what I love about the idea of mindfulness. The minute we slow down to be in the present moment and notice how we're feeling and what we're thinking, then we become much more in charge of who we are in that moment.
Now, let's go ahead for a moment and talk about fears when it comes to people believing there are directions or goals they have in their life. For instance, one of the biggest fears I know that people generally have is at work, the idea of going to their boss and asking for a raise. What do you think is the fear going on there? I thought we would kind of deal with some common ones people tend to have and kind of see how we look at that and how we process through that, because one of the things that I want people to be clear about in your book, Joy from Fear, is that you say fear, when it shows up in your life, and this isn't a quote, but generally this is what the message is, when fear shows up in your life, fear is actually showing up as your friend. It's really your guardian angel saying, look, this is an aspect of yourself that I really would love you to come to know and embrace, because it will make you stronger.
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. And I agree. So using your example, which is a really good one, about going to your boss to ask for a raise, naturally somebody might think, oh no, I could get fired for this. Or, oh, if I ask for a raise, I might be rejected and told no. Okay, I would say, that's fear. Now, do we want to stay in that place of fear and listen to the message that we might get fired, or that we might not get what we're asking for, or that we might get bullied? Okay, so then we go to the next step, which is, is it worth it to me? Knowing what the possible outcomes could be. Worst case, I get fired because I've asked for a raise. How likely is that? Probably not very likely. If you're a good and valuable employee, probably not very likely. Bosses want to pay less often just to make the company, balance sheets look better. So if you believe that you can withstand that worst fear, the fear of being fired, and also know your value, that if you are a good employee, and this is constructive fear talking now, but you are a good employee, you are valuable. If you're looking for, $20 an hour instead of $19 an hour, and you believe that you are worth $25 in this job, what is keeping you from asking for it? You are a good, faithful, hardworking employee. You are worth that. That's constructive fear talking. And so then the person might come back and say, oh, but I get butterflies in my stomach when I think about talking to my boss. Well, that's okay. Are the butterflies going to hurt you? Are they really bad? No, they're just a sign that you're doing something that's uncomfortable. And in our culture, so again, that's destructive fear coming in through the body, trying to tell you that your discomfort is a bad thing. No. Constructive fear would come and say, no, the discomfort's just discomfort. It's okay to be uncomfortable. In fact, perhaps when you make it through your discomfort and see that you can come out on the other side, perhaps you'll actually be less anxious in the future and have more self-confidence and more self-esteem. And so then that person says, oh, okay, so butterflies, that's actually a message, and I can make it through that. And so then let's take this person, and they go to the boss, and they feel the butterflies, and they do some breathing first, and then they go to the boss and say, now, notice the attitude the person has. I get really excited about this, because now the person's done the work to really listen to the positive, supportive messages of who they are, that they are a good and valuable employee, and that what they're asking for, whatever the raise is, that they know they're worth it. And if this boss doesn't pay it as much as the job, they like the job, they know they can get that money somewhere else because they know they're valuable. And they know that they are a key employee. And so they go to the boss. Now their attitude is one of confidence, real, genuine self-esteem, even if the butterflies are there. And they say to the boss, hey, so-and-so, I'd like to talk to you. I'd really like to tell you that I appreciate working here. I love it very much. I'm a wonderful employee. I love what I do. And I believe that I'm ready for a raise and do a raise. I'm getting this much now. I believe I'm, worth this on the open market. And I'm wondering how soon we can make that raise come to life.
I remember many years ago when I was in the hospitality industry, and there was a young girl who had said to me that she would like to go from, they call it expoing, where they get the food together and run it out to the table, make sure everything's right. She wanted to be on the service side. She wanted to be a waitress. I said, well, why don't you go and talk to management about that and let them know? And she says, well, I don't know. And she was a young girl. And I said, okay, well, so I went ahead and took the next couple of steps to see about kind of laying the groundwork to build her confidence to at least going and asking. So I went to two different managers, and each time I'd come back to her and say, I talked to this person, and they felt that you'd be pretty good at it. And I kept following up, and it took about a month, give or take, and she kept telling me, well, I haven't talked to him yet, and you could see she was afraid, or whatever it was. And so it came one morning, we were standing there by the kitchen, And I said, today is the day you're going to go up to the general manager there and you're going to let them know this is something you're interested in doing. Well, are you sure right now is a good time? Do you see him doing anything right now? I mean, you're not doing anything. We're not really busy. All you're going to do is go and let them know that this is what you're interested in. He stood there, you mean right now? And I said, this is what you want to go tell them. Say, I'm interested in doing this. What steps do I need to take moving forward to make this happen? Okay? And you could just see her. She's looking at me, and she's going to approach him. And I stayed there to let her know I'm here to support you, that this is not what you think it is, sort of a thing. But a lot of us are in that situation when it comes to asking for what we want, I think. That fear like we're talking about, the asking for a raise or asking for a date. And so she went up, and I know she knew that I was behind her. She could see me out of the corner of the eye, and I could actually feel the energy coming off of her that let me know she was really crossing that threshold when we face that fear. We can feel those butterflies. They're like flocks of these things. And then she asked, and then the feedback she got from the manager was real. It was encouraging. We've been talking about this for a while. Basically, what he was saying in a not-so-direct way is we've been waiting for you to ask us to do this so we could make it happen. He wasn't saying that directly, but that's really what he was saying. Then you can feel the energy like, God, I'm so glad I got that over with. Man, I'm excited now. And then after that point, I had asked her, I said, so when is it going to happen? And now and I think it started happening within about 2 or 3 weeks they started training her. And I said, see, that was a lot kinder than, can you believe the fact that they were actually waiting for you to ask? That's all there was to it. So, it's a way of helping and seeing that sometimes when you step in, that, the reality is much kinder, as Byron Katie would say, than the reality you formed in your mind of something.
Absolutely. And, Daniel, calling out a really beautiful part of your story is that you weren't focusing on, but I want to focus on it, was the fact that you were there. That sometimes, and that's a really important piece to focus on, sometimes when somebody doesn't have this self-confidence or the self-esteem, because they're two different things, but if somebody doesn't have the confidence in that particular area, what a difference it makes to have at least one person having your back, believing in you, and nudging you forward. And you did that for her. I as you were painting it, I could see you as a strong sort of father figure tree standing behind her that she will most likely never forget. That experience where you were there for her. And some people don't grow up with a mother or father or caregiver who had their back and gave them that image to feel. And you did that for that young woman. And I think experiences like that are critical in life because now that's part of her being, it's part of her psyche, and she can draw on that memory for the rest of her life, knowing that someone had her back, that somebody believed in her and propelled her to the next step. And so, kudos to you and kudos to every person who is able to do that, whether it's for their husband, their wife, their sweetheart, their child, knowing and embracing that important role in life of how important it is to believe in people and to nudge them to that next level in life. I think it's one of our greatest gifts to each other in relationship is to not be afraid. Not be afraid that somebody's going to get out there and be successful. No, don't be afraid of that somebody might be better than you or excel. Be proud of that. Be proud of the fact that you have that capacity, and that's what you did for that young girl. So, bless you.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate that. But, it's really true, too, that a lot of times it's nice to have somebody who nudges and kind of gives you that little extra shove, sort of like the bird out of the nest, it's time to fly. And to come to a point where once that has happened, like in this particular story that I was sharing was, do you see that reality is kinder than you think it is? And that's the thing that's unique about fear is that, for instance, let's say, as we were talking about earlier, asking for that raise. or potentially there's someone you would like to go out on a date with and get to know, your fear tends to be the rejection part of it. And so when you go a little bit deeper, there's the beauty of the fear itself. And it's, guys, and you talk about this, is that fear is that way of something inside of you coming out, materializing right there in front of you and saying, could we now please deal with this, integrate it, so that you can move forward and be stronger to be able to share in the world. And I know this is going to seem metaphysical, what I'm saying here, so that you can share the special gifts that you have been bestowed with at birth to share with the world in service of others. And how when fear paralyzes you, as you would call it, destructive fear, of the differences that you have in your book, is that then you're not doing anybody any good by being afraid, especially yourself.
Exactly. And I really believe in, as you, what you call, metaphysical, and I like that language because it is. When we, there's a quote by Marianne Williamson that I won't, I'll just get the energy of it, where she says, who are you not to shine? Who are you not to let your light shine? Because when you don't let your light shine, you don't act as that role model in the world. And when you do let your light shine, you give others permission to let their light shine. And that's, my paraphrase of what I hold in my heart that she said. And I believe that by that young woman, by you letting your light shine and going and nudging her forward, and then by her going forward and letting her light shine and her wish shine to, the management, then she was able to take that next step toward being her more radiant self. And the world doesn't need people who are less radiant, who are cloaking their light and living in fear. The world needs all of us to step up slowly, steadily, surely into being our better selves. And destructive fear impedes that process.
It's interesting you bring up that particular quote. When I interviewed Marianne Williamson some years ago, she says, I've been attributed to this, but it's really not from me. It comes from this other guy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was, and she brought it up, and I was like, because it was on the back of one of her books before that, and it was, be the light. That our deepest fear isn't that we are inadequate. It's that we are more powerful beyond measure, and that's a truth. That isn't just a wish, it's a fact, that we're really afraid of the fact that we really have a lot of power. And so, like in your book, you talk about 3 types of fear. There's constructive fear, transformational fear, which is, I think, the one that we just shared with the story with the young girl and the server thing. And then there's destructive fear. Let's go ahead and talk about those briefly and how you share ways that people can move beyond that, what the lessons could be taken from kind of moving through those things.
Okay. You had brought up the example of asking somebody out on a date. And I'll go with that because it's such a common situation. And every Thursday night I run a women's group, and it's a repeating theme in that group about, different women coming and they're afraid after having been in a relationship of being hurt or going out or going online and being rejected. And so just last night we happened to be working on this issue again with one of the women. And so here is, I'll make up an imaginary client who is pretty much emblematic of, many, many people, men or women, who have come out of a relationship, stayed single for a number of years out of fear, saying, oh my God, that was a disaster of a relationship. I am afraid of going out there again. It's too much time, too much effort. I don't want to bother with that. Yet the person yearns for connection, yearns for intimacy, yearns for a relationship. But the thoughts come up, if I get out there, all that's left is online dating and people take advantage of people, and it's a terrible world out there. I'll just go and stay at home. It's better there. So again, destructive fear, keeping that person in its grasp, saying, hey, you're going to repeat this relationship or the last 5 relationships you had. So the person stays in that cycle. So that's destructive fear at work in the relationship that person has with him or herself. Then they go out and they start dating if they're, so inclined, and they haven't done any self-work. So they go out and they do the same things, play the same games, have the same issues, have the same defense mechanisms, whether it's, being sarcastic or overly aggressive or passive-aggressive or too submissive. Whatever didn't work before often just happens again. So they retreat and, I told you, men out there are bad, women out there are bad. So again, all of that's destructive fear. Now let's take the next step, constructive fear. As that person becomes more in touch with who they are, with their part, their strengths and weaknesses, their part in the last relationship or last 20 relationships, what didn't you do well? What do you wish you had done more of? Not ever in a blaming or judgmental way, because constructive fear doesn't work that way. That's actually destructive fear. Anytime blame or judgment come in, that's destructive fear sneaking in. So if they can stay constructive and just say, hey, I want to learn from what I did. I want to learn from the behaviors that I ignored in myself or my partner. I want to see what red flags I missed, didn't pay attention to. I want to learn to become a better communicator. I want to learn to have better boundaries. All of this is taking the life experiences and learning constructively. Learning how to listen, to slow down and dismantle the message that says, oh, you're afraid of conflict. You don't want to get into a relationship. Right? That's destructive fear. Constructive fear would say, okay, well, conflict is healthy. I can have a disagreement with someone in a healthy way that I might learn and the other person might learn from. So I want to learn how to communicate and to have healthy disagreements. I don't have to have a high conflict relationship, and I don't have to have a no conflict relationship that pushes everything under the rug. So you work with those issues one at a time. And you might be thinking, well, how long is this going to take? Well, it takes as long as it takes for that person. Everyone has their own speed. Everyone has their own damage, their own issues. Some have a lot. Some have fairly minor cleanup to do. And then once they start becoming more in touch with the constructive messages of fear, then they get out and they start dating as an entirely more aware human being. They know what they want in a partner, so they're going out, and it's not, the message isn't, I don't want a man who does this. I don't want a woman who does that. I don't. Instead, they're saying the constructive things they're looking for. I want a partner who is respectful. I want a partner who has emotional communication abilities, emotional intelligence. I want a partner who likes to play. I want a partner who's hardworking. So they've become, and then they're also able to look at themselves and say, do I have in myself the qualities I'm seeking, right? Because
good point. It's funny how people have that wish list about what they want somebody else to be, and the fact is, but would you be that kind of person that person would want to have in their lives?
I dedicate, Daniel, an entire chapter, an entire section of the book to that very issue because it is important to know. I call them essential qualities. What essential qualities are you looking for in a relationship, in that other person? And do you have those qualities in yourself? Because if you're asking somebody to be something you're not, if I'm saying, hey, I want you to be honest and straightforward and a good, integrous person, and you're saying, yeah, but I like to keep secrets. I really like, going behind the back door to get my needs met. Well, okay, I don't know what, but at least you're aware of that, right? But
and they used to deliver milk to your door. Remember that?
Yeah. Well, I didn't have that, but I understand.
Right. Well, I didn't either, but anyway.
But the idea is there, right?
Right.
And so you get to say, do I want to be? Am I capable of being? Have I worked on myself hard enough to be the kind of partner that I'm asking for? And I think that's such an important moment of self-truth because many times we do it either where we don't expect somebody to have our essential qualities that we have, or we expect somebody else to have what we don't have to fill some sort of void in the self. And my personal belief is that we do our best when we have the qualities, the essential qualities that are important to us, whatever they are. Mine happen to be things like integrity, dignity, courage, respect, hard work, kindness, tenderness. Those are all things that are really important to me. Somebody's bank statement's far less important to me than somebody's internal qualities, right? And so I think that's so important to focus on. So now we're back to our imaginary person. He or she knows what they want, has done a lot of their healing work, and is now able to go out and date in a more intentional, discerning fashion. And I think that's key, because when you're intentional and you're discerning, then you have a better eye for the type of person you want, and you're more likely to draw that kind of person. And then so now this is where we come to transformational fear. Now you get to use all of that hard work, all of that self-work you've engaged in to create whatever this next step is in your life. And then we're talking about relationship. So now you're using that to transform your relationships. You've used the destructive fear, you haven't run from it. You've used the constructive fear's messages, and now you're putting it into action. And now you're transforming your life. You haven't skipped any steps. You're more aware, and now you're putting your beliefs and your hard work into action. And as we become, doers and actually walking our talk, that is how we transform our lives. And so that's how it would work in the real world.
Transcending what you were before to where you want to be and beyond is pretty amazing. In and of itself is a reward. Sometimes, a lot of times, that actual goal that you achieve, I like to share a quick story a lot of times with people. There was a period of time where somebody suggested, hey, get a Bible, put it by your bed, and just randomly open up to a page, whether it's at the end of the day or at the beginning, and see what happens there. And I'm not somebody who goes to church or consider myself religious more than I do consider myself spiritual, but there was a passage in there I opened up to one day, and it was a moment that I was feeling rather kind of vulnerable and down, and it came out of an area of Romans, I think it was. And I never forget this, because it was the idea of giving, getting your goal achieved. And this is very loosely worded, but the point is it isn't so much the goal that you desire, but it's the effects of the journey of the goal itself that you're really looking for.
Absolutely.
And you always hear that, it's the journey that's the true reward. The goal just gives you a direction to go with your journey. Because once you're there, you don't feel as satisfied as you thought you were, but you look back and go, man, that was really a trip when I took that. And certainly when you go on those journeys, there's a lot of fear to face there, isn't there?
There definitely can be, and some of those adages, like it's the journey, or it's the process, not the end. We forget how much, because they're so simple, we forget how true they are, that it is indeed how we do the journey of life. It's not the end result. It's how we do every day. And I remember seeing on a card one time, and I kept the card, how you do something is how you do everything. And, it is a little global in a sense, yet it does remind me, that simple phrase reminds me that how I do everything, how I treat the checker at the grocery store, how I treat the mailman, how I treat myself, how I treat the dog, all of those little things are part of my journey. And that it's so important for each one of us to take our impact in the world very seriously, and realize that if we're honking at someone in traffic, or getting in, a place of road rage, or cheating, the teller $5 or whatever it is, they're all parts that are part of our soul. And so we want to be, this is one of my big themes, we want to be, ideally, from my perspective, the same person inside our homes as we are in the outside world. We want to have that same cohesive nature of being a good and kind and loving person. I think that's why I laugh sometimes when, a wife or husband will come to me and they'll say, oh, but, everybody loves my husband or everybody loves my wife, but you ought to see what he or she is like, behind closed doors. Oh, my God, the gloves come off, right? And to me, the goal is in our journey is to be the same person throughout our days. And ideally, that person is a kind and loving and contributing member of society in whatever our small gift would be.
Now, it's really fascinating. There's an area that I would like to explore with you. As just yesterday, we were doing a segment on love, and this guy had a particular way that he wrote about it that I found very unique. Because there's, tens of thousands of books written out there about love and soulmates and all that kind of a thing. And each of them have value intrinsically depending on where you are at the time of your life. But I found this one unique, and why I bring this one up is because it reminds me of a time when I was facing the Internal Revenue Service for, to me, what seemed like a very big bill at a time that, boy, where's this money going to come from kind of a thing. And they were demanding their payment through the mail. And I decided to sit down with this thing in front of me and give them a call to see how this could be worked out. This is just all there was to it. It was something I've never done before. And boy, you feel the weight of the world when you're facing something like this. But what I noticed at that moment as I was ready to do this, and I was feeling the tremendous amount of anxiety that I was feeling, as I was picking up that phone in my mind, I'm saying, I'm going to do this and just see what happens. That I was doing some really deep breathing and felt very relaxed about it. Even though the fear was still there, I was breathing. And he talked about that yesterday. And it was really unique what he was saying. To me it was. He says, think about the brain and its evolution. We first started with the reptilian mind, which is there for survival. It's there to be sure that we live. And he talked about breathing because what that does is it triggers that area of the brain to let you know that you're still alive because you're breathing in and out. Now, you talk about that particular thing in your way in your book, The Joy from Fear. Let's go ahead and talk about why breathing is important, because you talk about breathing exercises in your book when it comes to facing and moving through your fear.
Breathing, as the other author said, addresses the primitive brain, the reptilian brain, lizard brain, right? What it does is it brings on board your parasympathetic nervous system. We often forget, as we're living in highly anxious, stressed lives, that we've actually brought on the fight, flight, freeze response, right? And when we have, especially when we're in a place of fight or flight, we've brought on our sympathetic nervous system. Our heart races, our breathing is shallow. We're only breathing from the upper part of the lungs. We are often flushed, anxious, nervous. All of that is the sympathetic nervous system preparing us, and it's a natural response, right? Unfortunately, it's the response that was intended in primitive times to get us away from the tiger or the bear or the, whatever was going to harm us. Yet we forget in today's world where we don't really have those active real threats. That's why I, talk a lot about slowing down to differentiate between a rational fear and an irrational fear. We can realize, wait, something's not out to get me. I can just breathe now. So we're automatically just clicking on the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps us decrease the heightened level of adrenaline and cortisol in the system. We calm down. We know that we're safe. We're not as reactive now, because in fight or flight mode, we're highly reactive. We're running on emotion. And so when we bring on our breathing, we can come back and just calm ourselves, become less constricted. This is another big piece, and more open. more open, more aware, and this also ties into love because then you are in a naturally more loving, open, receptive space. You're not in protective, constricted space. And that's why I focus a lot on breathing as an important tool. One, it's free. You don't need to pay to do it. Two, it's portable. You can use a breathing technique anywhere. Three, not that some people don't need medication. Some people, do rely on their medications for, psychological well-being. But in the absence of medications or even with medications, you can use it as a natural way to reduce anxiety and stress. And then the benefits, as I've alluded to, are incredible because you think more clearly. Your emotions are still present, but you're more aware of them. So you're able to use your emotions to your benefit, not to your detriment. And so in those ways, as we learn to breathe and use that very portable self-soothing technique, we can learn to be in the present moment and deal with life's challenges, whatever they are, from a really clear, calm, and relaxed space.
And would you agree that when you're in that time and space of the present moment, that things don't seem to be as big or hard to confront, I guess, for lack of a better word, as we thought they were?
I absolutely agree. It is that idea that most of us have experienced, right, of having a monster under the bed, right, as children. And the idea of the monster under the bed for the child is that if somebody doesn't take it seriously and teach self-soothing techniques, or mom doesn't come with a broom and magically sweep the monster away and help you learn to self-soothe and put you back to bed, the monster gets bigger, the monster gets worse. The monster gets more consuming. And it is that way in the adult mind because remember, no matter how smart we are, no matter how old we are, it has nothing to do with that. When we are afraid, we are coming from the primitive brain. And that primitive brain, sadly, is not the most rational place in the world. It's just concerned with survival. So, yes, as we learn to breathe, we do become the monster under the bed or in the closet or the boss in his room. All of those big fears become much more realistic. And as you said with the quote about reality being kinder than we think it is, that's the monster under the bed sort of thing. When we face the monster and realize that it's really not that bad usually, it's usually much worse or non-existent. Often the monster under the bed was only in our mind.
It's funny that we're talking about this because years ago I was told a story that I actually wrote in class when I was in 5th grade, a couple of years after I'd heard it. It was sort of a Halloween story. And it had to do with a young boy who went to this old abandoned, sort of a haunted house sort of a story, if you will, during a stormy night in October. As part of a dare and initiation to join the local kids gang in his neighborhood. There were all these noises, and the beauty of the story is that there's a lot of anxiety and stress that are built into the story, like, the slamming of the shutter in a faraway room, and you're all in the dark, you're by yourself, and just all these different things as this boy decides to explore the house. So he's literally facing all of his fears, but he's feeling them all at the same time. And just till now, it didn't even occur to me how unique this story was. And eventually it comes to a point where he goes into the final room, call it the master bedroom upstairs. He's been everywhere else in the house there is to go. And he sees a door slightly ajar and notices something moving just beyond the door. So he realizes there's something beyond that door there that needs to be faced. And of course, with trepidation, he slowly, step by step, approaches the door and notices whatever that's behind the door seems to be approaching him at the same time. And then eventually he opens the creaking door and notices this somewhat large-looking thing. He can't discern, but he knows there's a shape that almost seems to be the same size that this boy is. And he reaches across, and as he touches it, he feels this sort of dusty, cold, solid feeling within it. And then he realizes, he starts to wipe his hand back and forth away the dust and realizes it was a mirror reflecting his own image. And this is and it was funny because it was actually a cousin of mine that told me this story one night for Halloween, and I took that and I just really added a lot of and a teacher actually applauded me in the 5th grade for that story, because although it seems to be a horror story, you realize the whole thing is just all the anxiety that's built. And you were talking about the monster under the bed, and isn't it true then that in fear, or this monster, if you will, that the monster is just as scared as we are?
And you're making me think of a really funny story, so I'll tell it because it says it so poignantly. This is not my client, but another therapist client had a man coming in who is 39 years old and was having recurring dreams of a monster in the dream. And this monster kept chasing him and chasing him and chasing him, and he thought, this is ridiculous. I am the only still in monster dreams. Finally told the therapist about the dream, said, hey, I need to tell you this because they're getting worse. It's not getting better. So the therapist said, next time you have the dream, see if you can actually turn and confront the monster and ask it what it wants. Ask it. Talk to it. And so the client did that, and when the dream came again, stopped in his tracks, turned around, looked at the monster, and screamed, what do you want? And the monster held up a sign, and the sign said, happy birthday.
Really?
And yes, and here, all the monster was doing was, it wasn't a scary monster. The monster was, in a way, constructive fear, saying, stop running from turning 40. It's not going to do you any good.
Wow.
You're turning, happy birthday, welcome, happy birthday. And so sometimes what we perceive to be the monster is actually a gift. And all that monster wanted to do is have the guy turn around and say, hey, embrace your 40th birthday. It's here. It's going to be great.
And it's interesting, too, because this could be a whole other show, and we've certainly done our fair share of segments on dreaming and dream work, but that even in the Don Juan series by Carlos Castaneda, one of them is The Art of Dreaming, is that it's suggested to do the same thing in the nightmare, is that he seems to be a little more brutal about it, but it's when you see that monster, the idea is that you kill it and then you ask for a gift. And I think maybe killing is more of a metaphor than it is the actual physical act of it. But when you talk about this person here turning 40, I'm kind of curious, because this was actually said to me years ago by a hypnotherapist about fear, that he said ultimately he thought that all fears are basically the same, and that is the fear of death itself. No matter what the fear is, it's that we're afraid of death. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you could distill it to that. I distill it in a different way in my book, which I could see how you could distill it down to death. And I think when I look at people's fears, often it comes down to, I'm afraid of being rejected, I'm afraid of being unloved, I'm afraid of being lonely. And so if you distill those down, we come to, you could say, I'm afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of being alone, right? Not loved, not accepted. And what is underneath that? If you go down one step under, if I'm alone, I'm susceptible to threat. A lion is much more likely to get me. I'm much more likely to die if I do not have cohorts around me or a partner around me. So I could see how somebody could get to death. That's not necessarily where I take it, because I really believe that what humans want most, what all of us want most, is to be connected, to feel loved, and to feel safe. And I think that's where we are at our best selves, whatever that means to somebody. It might mean having a lot of friends. It might mean being alone. It might be having a safe marriage, right? But when we feel safe and loved, I believe overarchingly, we are our better selves. And so I think that's our work as individuals, is to figure out, what do I need to do within myself and within my life to feel safe, to feel loved. We can't go out and buy that. Many people think you can, right? I can feel safe by, drinking or, winning the lottery or gambling or having lots of sex. That means lots of people love me or whatever it is. But no, it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with finding that place in yourself of knowing what you need to be safe and loved, and then doing the work that it takes to cultivate that within your own being, and then as much as you can within your environment. So I think I do see the part where you could take it to death. It's not my favorite.
I felt that was somewhat a little overly simplified. But I could see the root of it, too, in one way. But I think the way that you just put it makes a lot more sense, really.
Yeah, and going back to your thing on dreams, I was trained as a Jungian therapist, right? So those are my roots. And so I do a lot of dream analysis with certain clients, not with every case. And so many people come in originally, they, I have to tell you about this dream, or can I tell you a dream? And I say, sure. And I have never found a dream or a nightmare that has had a negative message. It may appear frightening. It may appear fearful, but the psyche speaks in metaphors. It can't come out and say something in words. And so as the psyche, I believe our psyches want us to be optimized beings, right? We want to be our better selves. We just might not know how to get there, or may have learned bad patterns. But I believe that our dreams, I love that you touched on that, because every client who's ever brought a scary dream to me, when we've been able to really dismantle it, we've found that the psyche is trying to offer a positive, supportive message.
Yeah, and it's funny that you brought up the one where there was this monster chasing this guy. For a quick experience on that, I even years ago, I had Godzilla chasing me as a kid, and my mother basically said the same thing. Why don't you just turn around and face him? And so I did. And this was when I was 5 or 6 years old, and that would turn me into a lifelong lucid dreamer, actually, because that's really the gift in that, is that you get to become a lucid dreamer because you learn, hey, I'm in a dream, and I'm going to turn around. I was told to face this. As a kid, I didn't know any better, so I just did it. It was pretty interesting what happened. What I wanted to get to on the chasing part of things was that I remember a dream I had some years ago where I was sort of in a playground area, and I was being chased by phantoms, and what was unique is as I ran, it was almost as though these things were tethered to me by an invisible bungee cord, because the more I ran, the more they seemed to slingshot and get closer to me, okay? Now, what was funny about that was I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to stop running and see what happens now, and I just stopped. And this is something you might share with others as well, but what was really funny about this was the fact that once I stopped, that they sort of stopped, and they had this look on their face sort of like, well, now what do we do next? I'm not chasing you anymore. What do we do? They just literally stopped, and they weren't anywhere near, and I found that very curious. So.
It is beautiful how sometimes when we run from our fears, they pull us back. And that's such beautiful imagery, because you're not learning anything. If you're running, you're not learning. So it's going to pull you back I love how you said that, because it's got to pull you back. Otherwise, you won't learn the lesson.
Absolutely. So there you go. So face your fears, because there it is. You're facing yourself ultimately in the end, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, this is very exciting work that you have here, and I know with just the minute or two that I have left, I'd like for you to give out contact information, a website where people can find your book, Joy from Fear, things like that.
Okay, website, drcarlamanley.com, and my last name is Manly, drcarlamanley.com. You can find me there. My book is available for pre-order right now. It's out next Monday. I'm really excited about that. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble online. You can also request it from your local bookstore. I'm big on supporting our local stores. The publisher is Familius, awesome publisher, and people can find me again on my website, drcarlamanley.com. I love answering questions, so if somebody wants to email me, you can email me through my website. Also, my website has an abundance of free articles and resources, so feel free to visit my website. You can also find me on YouTube and enjoy some meditation videos, that sort of thing. So there you have it.
Well, there you go. So in the end, go tell Carla your dreams, and you'll realize those nightmares are nothing more than gifts, and that's ultimately what fear is a gift, isn't it?
It is.
Outstanding. Carla, thank you for being on the Beyond 50 radio program today and facing your fear of being on radio. It's not as bad as you thought it was.
No, it's lovely, and you're a lovely host. So thank you for having me. I'm appreciative. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks.
And for all of you out there who are afraid to visit our website, face that fear, push that button, and go anyway. And that is at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. What you'll discover there are special gifts such as our e-newsletter and what's up to date with going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.